I do want to say that MoonPay is one of the biggest partners of our show, which we're grateful for. And they've also allowed me to accept my payment from them in Bitcoin. Yep, that's how I'm doing it. Now, I do want to.
Theo Vaughn is taking payment in Bitcoin. Would you do the same? Whew, I don't know. After this last year, I don't know how many people are feeling super bullish about Bitcoin right now. That's all right. That's all right. Welcome, y'all. Doing a late night stream here. I'm going to touch on just a few subjects tonight. Number one, I'm going to do a deep dive on what's going on with Greenland and the history there, what that could mean. There's a lot of talk about that right now. It's starting to gain a little bit of traction. I'm going to talk about what happened with MSCI and Bitcoin. And, we thought there'd be a lot more positive price action, frankly. And I'm going to break down what exactly happened there, because there are some new rules they put in place that put a little bit of water on our rally that we are hoping for. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Ex Machina and their community sale tomorrow, as well as one of their propositions that's open for a vote right now. So talk about all of that. Obviously, a lot going on in the world today. A lot of craziness out there right now. Shoot, man, I'll tell you what. But we're gonna stay dialed into what's happening in the markets. So there's been a lot of talk about Greenland over the last few days, and in particular, there's all this talk about how the U.S. wants Greenland. Earlier this year, they're like, well, are they going to seize Greenland? Are they going to purchase Greenland? There's reports coming out about us purchasing Greenland. And I want to play a couple of clips just to give you a little bit of background here on some of the things that we're hearing from the president. I think that is really pushing a lot of this rhetoric forward right now. And then we're going to break down what this all means. So this is one clip.
About Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you. You know what Denmark did recently to boost up security in Greenland? They added one more dog sled. It's true.
Sir,
they thought that was a great move.
What would the justification be for a claim to Greenland?
I don't want to talk about Greenland now. I just say this. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And the European Union needs us to have it.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, and we're going to unpack all of it. But there's one other clip here I want to play as well, and then we're going to get into all the details about Denmark, about NATO, okay, and, Europe, and what it all means.
We need Greenland for national security, not for minerals. We have so many sites for minerals and oil and everything. We have more oil than any other country in the world. We need Greenland for national security. And if you take a look at Greenland, you look up and down the coast, you have Russian and Chinese ships all over the place.
So we're going to talk about if that's true as well. These claims that Russia and China have ships all over the place around Greenland, if that's actually valid or not. He keeps saying that. So what is the deal with Greenland? And when did this all start? So I thought this was kind of interesting looking in the history here. This is not the first time that there's been talk about the U.S. acquiring Greenland. In fact, the first time was back with Truman. Well, the first time a president, at least, when made a move. And they offered Denmark at the time $100 million in gold to buy Greenland, which they did turn down at the time. This is all the way back in 1946. Now, this, of course, was picked up again under Trump in his first term. Really, in 2019 is when it started. Talking about it's a large real estate deal for national security and economic reasons. And more recently, especially this year, and then the rhetoric has really been turned up this week, especially after what happened with Venezuela. I think now there's been a lot of attention turned to Greenland. And there's been a lot of talk about, us having discussions with Denmark about Greenland and whether or not we'll be able to purchase that. So there were other times looking further back in the 1860s, in the 1950s and 1910s. So this is something that's been going on for quite some time. So what's the big deal with Greenland? So there's actually quite a few reasons why it is a very valuable piece of land. One of the things I wanted to show, though, just to show you a visual. When you look at the map, it looks massive up there. It's kind of funny how maps work, though. If you actually moved it down here, this is the actual size of Greenland. So it is a little bit deceiving when you look at maps and how big it is. But the main thing to call attention to really is its relation to Denmark. And you'll see here, you have Greenland here, you have Denmark over here. And that is a very important relationship to highlight. So a little bit of background here. Now, Denmark is a founding member of NATO, so since 1949. And Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. So it's covered by Denmark's NATO membership. It says Greenland is not an independent NATO member, but its territory falls under the alliance's collective defense obligations. Okay, so again, goes on to say here, Greenland is a self-governing part of the Kingdom of Denmark. So Denmark handles foreign affairs, defense, and security policy for the kingdom, but Greenland has autonomy over internal matters like resources and education. It goes on to say here that multiple sources confirm that Greenland is part of NATO territory through Denmark, so not on their own, but through Denmark. But this is an important part here. An attack on Greenland would be considered an attack on a NATO member, potentially triggering Article 5 consultations. Okay, so two things I want to highlight here. Well, who all is part of NATO? NATO is 32 member countries. See a lot of these on the list here. United States obviously being one of them. You'll see two countries that aren't listed here. Well, China and Russia are obviously not part of NATO. But Article 5 is the other thing I want to talk about here. What is Article 5? Okay, so Article 5 is the collective defense clause of the North Atlantic Treaty, also known as the Washington Treaty. So it was signed back in 1949. Basically, the cornerstone of NATO and embodies the principle that an armed attack against any one ally within NATO, any of those countries I just showed, is considered an attack against all allies. Okay, so there would be a move from NATO then to work together in response to any of those attacks that would be on any of their member countries. Interestingly, this has only been enacted once in history. So I found this in the research. Only once has this been invoked in NATO's history. That was September 11th, 9/11, back in 2001. It says that if the attacks were directed from abroad, they would be covered by Article 5. Indeed, they were. It says that this led to operations where they were patrolling U.S. airspace, naval patrols in the Mediterranean. So kind of interesting there. It's a little bit of history there for you. But going back up, they do have NATO coverage with Greenland. The other part of this whole thing is that the U.S. does have a space base. It's their most northern located base in the world. So this was started back in 1951 with the defense agreement between Denmark and the United States. So this is all because they're all part of NATO, right? So the base supports, this is key, missile warning, space surveillance, and missile defense operations critical to the U.S. and NATO security. Okay, so there's a little bit of background there. Now, there are really three reasons why Greenland is so valuable. Number one is the military and security role. So we kind of touched on this a little bit. Obviously, we do have our base station there. And it is really important for tracking what Russia is doing as much as anybody. But it says that it is the northernmost installation, and it hosts early warning radars for ballistic missile detection, for space surveillance, satellite tracking, contributing directly to U.S. and NATO missile defense and space domain awareness. So it is a critical piece of land when it comes to military. Another aspect, though, which is kind of interesting, is that with the ice caps melting, it is opening up new trade routes. So looking forward, this is going to become more and more valuable and more important. So it says climate change melts Arctic ice, opening new routes like the Northwest Passage, Northern Sea Route, and Transpolar Route. And this could shorten shipments from between Asia and Europe by weeks, bypassing choke points like the Suez Canal. So if you look here, here's a physical representation of this because the ice is melting. So this is going to be opening up all these different shipping routes, as opposed to what they've had to do before. And it just mentioned there, the Suez Canal. So if we look at this, as opposed to them having to go all the way below Africa, they've been going through this area here. But there's been disruption there before. Okay. And it is, the new routes will in many cases be shorter, but even the Suez Canal cut down shipping times from what would be weeks to 10 to 16 days. So that was already a big advancement, but now you have all of these new shipping routes that are going to be opening up over by Greenland. So again, strategically, when you think about this, not only is it a really important piece of land for military, but for future shipping routes, it is going to be absolutely critical. It's another reason why a lot of these countries are posturing over this area. Lastly, of course, Trump said it's not about the rare earth minerals, right? It's not about the oil, right? I'm not so sure about that. Greenland hosts vast untapped deposits of rare earth elements. So we've heard a lot about that this year, right? It's one of the big, I guess, one of the big strongholds that China has over us right now. And in the negotiations that they can really hold against us. I have to think that this is part of the equation. I don't really care what Trump says. They have rare earth elements that we need. Okay. So obviously, just like anytime the U.S. tries moving anywhere, look at Venezuela recently, a lot of it is posturing, man, for oil, for rare earth minerals, whatever it may be. But it does say in summary here, Greenland's stronghold status arises from its irreplaceable geography in an increasingly contested and accessible Arctic, amplified by great power rivalries. So those are the main reasons why you have China, Russia, and the U.S. all posturing for position over this. So the big question is there going to be a sale here? History tells us it hasn't happened in the past. The other claim I wanted to bring up too, by the way, is whether or not whether or not Trump's claim is accurate as far as, well, there's Russia and Chinese ships all over the place around Greenland. There's no evidence to support that's true. He said this a lot recently, but vessel tracking data does not show that to be true. Danish and Greenlandic officials, same thing. They're saying it's actually not true. So is that an excuse they're throwing out there now to justify some sort of action? I don't know. Okay. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is worth calling that out, that there is no data that we have that's publicly available, at least, to support those claims. Now, what is the likelihood for this to happen? Right now, probably market has it about 15% chance. So not very likely. If you look at whether they will acquire part of Greenland in 2026, that shot all the way up just a few days ago to 39%, back down to 15%. So it's not looking super likely, guys. But I wanted to dive in and really understand that whole dynamic between Denmark, between Greenland. What do they have to offer? Those new shipping routes, everything is pretty fascinating, really. And the history there, and how we have, as the U.S., has tried to gain ownership or control over that territory for quite a while at this point. But that is the deep dive on Greenland, guys. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin. This is a story that's been popping back up again. I covered it earlier this year. Long story short, self-custody, guys. Like, don't leave your shit on exchanges. Okay, like, bottom line. Obviously, this is not surprising out of California. Says that Gavin Newsom signed a bill allowing the state to transfer custody of any Bitcoin or cryptocurrency held on exchanges after 3 years of inactivity. So, yeah, don't custody your assets on exchanges, guys. I mean, you shouldn't anyway, but certainly if you're in California, you shouldn't. Man, it's not that surprising. I'm just going to leave it at that. All right, let's talk about the MSCI thing. So I talked about this last night. There was this risk hanging over MicroStrategy now for months at this point. And the whole deal was the MSCI was talking about delisting strategy and delisting a lot of digital asset treasury companies. And this would obviously there'd be downside risk here if there was delisting, because it does create a lot of passive buying pressure on these different companies. So we got news that broke last night that MSCI confirmed it'll keep Bitcoin treasury companies like Strategy in its indexes, and this finally ended the removal FUD. So this is something that I've been talking about, I've been covering quite a bit. And I'm like, man, this is huge news. Like, we should see things pump. And we saw a little bit of a reaction, but it retraced pretty quickly, and we're now trading below where we were. And it made me wonder, like, what are we missing here, right? I mean, the market is generally pretty smart. It normally gets things right. So it has to be something that you can read between the lines on, and that is exactly the case. Says that while this is good news, Bitcoin is not pumping. And it gives an example here of a rule that was instituted from the MSCI with this whole decision. So it says that, in this example, say a strategy had 200 million shares in MSCI indexes. So index funds tracking MSCI owned roughly 10% of those shares. So now a strategy issued 20 million new shares to raise capital. Before this change, MSCI would have added those 20 million shares to the index. And this is the key part right here. The index funds would have to buy 10% of those shares. So roughly 2 million shares would be required to be purchased because they are included in the MSCI. So anytime that they were issuing shares to raise capital, they had forced buying for being included in the MSCI, essentially. So it does say, if shares are $300 each, index funds buy 600 million worth automatically. So that was a lot of buy pressure that was kicking in. So it was helping in a lot of different ways. It was helping Strategy raise capital more easily. It was helping them buy more Bitcoin, and it was supporting the Bitcoin price indirectly, for sure. Now, the change that they made is that if they issue more shares, the MSCI is not going to add them. In essence, they're not going to have that additional buying pressure. So here's the example after the rule. Let's say Strategy issues the same 20 million shares. MSCI says they will not increase their share count in the index. So in that first example we gave, they would add those shares. 10% of those shares would be purchased then. In this case, none of those shares are added. Index funds are by 0 new shares. There's no new forced demand from being part of MSCI. So Strategy now has to go find private buyers, offer discounts. They're probably going to end up raising less money, buying less Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the key reason. So it says, like, why did MSCI do this? There's a lot of different stuff being thrown around out there. One that I found particularly interesting was this post here, talking about how, if you don't know, MSCI was founded by Morgan Stanley and still has deep connections to the bank. Okay. If you all remember, Morgan Stanley just announced that they're launching a big Bitcoin ETF. Okay. That was just yesterday. I covered this last night. So yesterday, Morgan Stanley filed for a spot Bitcoin ETF. MicroStrategy is essentially a competitor to them. And this is because a lot of investors put money in MicroStrategy to gain passive exposure to Bitcoin. If they can make MicroStrategy less attractive, that could, force people to turn to the Morgan Stanley spot ETF is kind of the idea here. But it says over the years, this caused MicroStrategy stock to rise. It's become one of the largest corporate holders of Bitcoin. With MSCI's new rule, MicroStrategy's ability to acquire more Bitcoin will go down for the reasons I just covered. So any attempt to dilute more shares will end up crashing the price due to no passive demand that comes along with it. I don't know if that's necessarily just 100% given, but certainly, issuing more shares, if you don't have that additional 20% of automatic buying pressure, is something you have to take into consideration. There's no doubt about it. But it does say that this will force large investors to pull their money out of MicroStrategy and into other treasury companies. And they believe here a good chunk of that will definitely flow into Morgan Stanley. There are some assumptions in there, but I don't think it's too far-fetched. But the bottom line here, guys, is that the price of Bitcoin did pump a little bit, not as much as you would think, and that's because there's more details here. And now MicroStrategy is faced with a pretty difficult decision on how to raise more capital. So I'm sure they'll come up with a strategy. You have to give Saylor that he's pretty good at coming up with new strategies that other people haven't thought of. He's pretty creative in the way that he structures these things. So I'm not ready to say the gig is up. I'll put it that way. Now, would I buy MicroStrategy? Probably not. I personally, if there's a spot ETF available, and I've talked to Unleashing Deepin thank you for reposting. Make sure to repost if you haven't already. I don't see the point in owning a digital asset treasury if there's a spot ETF available. Okay. And that's the key part there. We've seen this time and time again, if digital asset treasury is there, you want to get exposure through traditional, stock exchanges, brokerage exchanges. It makes sense, I think, to maybe front run spot ETFs, but we've seen that the premium on DATS has really dissolved. In fact, many of them are trading at a discount at this point. So to me, why not just buy the spot ETF? Okay, that's kind of my take on it. But all that said, Bitcoin really unmoved, and that was kind of shocking. But again, I guess just because there's more to the story there. Sitting at 91,254. The main support level, and we've talked about this many times, is they need to break above 94,000, turn that into support, and really break out above that. And we just haven't seen it. I hope we see it soon, but we haven't seen it. The other thing I have to call out, and I called this out last night, if you don't know what the CME gap is, check out my YouTube channel. I have a tutorial or a video that explains what it is. There are two CME gaps that have yet to be filled. Down here, right at the really 90, just over 90,000, 90,500, but another one down here at 88,000. So I would expect at some point those will get filled. I don't know when, but just something to keep in mind. As we get down there, you'll see a lot of people posting about it, like CME gap closed. Now we can go higher. But moving forward, that's enough about Bitcoin. That's enough about Bitcoin. Let's talk about Solana. Solana just became the largest blockchain by market capitalization for tokenized stocks. So we see Ethereum certainly seems to be winning on the stablecoin game. And I covered that last night. I think they had $9 trillion in stablecoin transactions in Q4 alone. Pretty remarkable stuff there. But when it comes to tokenized stocks, guys, I think Solana could end up being the big winner here. You check that out. That's pretty impressive. Robinhood's been adding a lot of tokenized stocks, so pretty good to see there. Good stuff for Solana. We also saw a lot of liquidity flowing into Solana. So stablecoin supply surged by $900 million in the last 24 hours. Of course, this is in conjunction with the same timing, if you will, that Morgan Stanley filed for their spot Solana ETF, I should add. So pretty big things happening for Solana. Let's hope it impacts the whole ecosystem in a positive way. Obviously, a lot of the projects we're invested in here and deep in are in Solana. Solana and Base are the two clear winners, in my opinion. I've got a healthy investment in projects on both ends of the spectrum, actually. But looking at both of those assets, XRP has been on a tear over the last week, by the way, up 18%. Ethereum, 6.4%. Down 2.3% on the day. Nothing exciting happening, guys. Things are just chopping. More of the same. Solana sitting at $136. So higher than we were at the recent lows, not all-time lows, the recent lows. But annoying price action today, man. Like it's pretty gross. Like just nothing, just kind of chopping. I mean, it's better than bleeding out, I suppose, but still kind of gross. Looking at the crypto bubbles, top 100 on the day wasn't great. I mean, we had a lot of red, but things are bouncing back here in the last hour or so. Still, week and monthly are looking pretty nice. If we look at deep end stuff, Render's been on a tear recently over the last month. Everything's green in the week. Days yucky, and we're seeing things bounce back. GeoNet's actually had a pretty nice week. Some pretty decent price action there. So love to see that. All right, I want to talk about Ex Machina, and then I'm going to cut off here. You say, can't trust these TradFi banks anymore. Yeah, I'll tell you what. I agree, brother. All right. Talking about Ex Machina. So right now they have a stake in 1X, Aptronic, Figure AI, Agility. And if you remember, I've covered this before, but this is their voting early on what projects they should invest in. You see Figure here, you see Apptronic, you see 1X, Agility there. Nura had not been invested in yet. Well, it is up for a vote now. Looks like it's going to pass, guys. 99.91% likelihood of passing. So I would say that's pretty clearly a signal that it's going to pass. There's about 12 hours left, just under 12 hours left to vote on this. This is here's the details. They are based out of Germany. The main details on the actual investment, and you can go in and read through these details, but would be approximately $1.75 million. Says with final conversion determined at the time of wiring. It's part of their Series C primary, currently at a $4.7 billion valuation, subject to final round terms, but would be for common stock. So pretty cool stuff there. Nura is a company that I think is going to absolutely freaking explode. By the way, check out Ex Machina's blog, man. And it's really cool to read through the details of these different proposals. There's a bunch of them out there that they voted on, that they've approved. You can read and learn about each one of these, each one of these projects. So it's pretty cool. Like if you look here, this one in particular is one that was turned down because it was a military manufacturers is going to make robots for war purposes, and that's why I got voted down. Everything else has been passed though. So here's the 1X, and there's a number of them, obviously. So everything is voted on before they invest, but a lot of great details in there. And again, the blog is pretty incredible. The other thing I want to point out here, guys, is their community launch, 9 hours and 48 minutes. We are almost there. So that is your last chance to invest before their TGE. We don't have an exact date on that yet. If you are in the US, you're going to have to use VPN. You don't have to put it in your identity or anything. It's just you just need your wallet. But that's the dealio, guys. I do plan on getting a little bit of exposure here. I have more money I want to invest, but I'm going to kind of wait till TGE to see what happens. We just haven't seen a lot of successful TGEs in the current market conditions, and we've seen sell-offs. So, things can change quickly. Things could definitely improve by the time they have their TGE, and then I think it'd be very successful. But I do want to have a little bit of powder sitting there in case. You never know. Like, look what happened with 375 AI. That's still sitting at just over 3 cents. Like, those are the examples I'm looking at for things that have TGE'd during these periods of time with the market down. Generally, 2 to 3 days after TGE is when you see things bottom out. That's the trend I've been seeing, at least. So, so I'm being pretty careful about how I DCA into these in current market conditions, at least. But I'm hopeful that we will see things turn around later this year, y'all. And that is what I got for you tonight. Hopefully, y'all had a fantastic day, a great start to your year. And I'll be back with you again next time. Probably be on tomorrow for a little bit. With that said, I will talk to you all later. Peace.